Hello and welcome to Cricket8 Podcast. I'm Megha, joined by Jarrod Kimber. And Australia have crawled their way back into the series, having lost the first test. They are now back at it with a comprehensive 10 wickets win against India. So, initial reactions, Jarrod, and just the nature of the loss for India.
I don't think it's that bad.
Is it? Is it not?
Well, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it's that bad that they've lost this test?
Did they look at any point that they'd be able to stage a comeback or gain an edge at any point in the game? Or did it look like Australia, throughout the course of the test, were in control? That's what I
Did
thought.
it look like Australia was going to make a comeback in the first test?
It didn't look like that either. India were comprehensively defeating Australia in that one.
You know what I mean? This is the way I look at it. You come into this series and you know the first two tests. If you're India, probably not the ideal test, right? You've got the first test is in Perth, so already not ideal. Then the second test, Megha, is in Adelaide, and you've got Mitchell Starc and the pink ball and all that sort of nonsense going on. I think if you come out of those two tests and you've got to win, Bumrah's still, we hope, healthy. Jaiswal's made some runs. Nitesh Reddy has looked good. Harshit Rana's had moments. Siraj has been in form. I don't know. If it's me, I'd be going, all right, well, we probably thought we had a higher percentage chance of winning in the last three tests than the first two. So we've lost, and it's fine.
So, do you think it was Travis Head who was the difference, like in the World Test Championships, like in the World Cup finals? Because if you remove his innings from the first innings, and there's not a whole lot of difference between other batters from Australia and the Indian batters.
I don't think Travis Head should have been man of the match. I think the two most important players for Australia are probably Mitchell Starc in the first innings and then Marnus Labuschagne. So if you look at what Travis Head creates, one of the reasons he can put the big lead on is because Mitchell Starc has taken so many wickets, right?
Yeah.
So you start there, but then you also look at it. Why did Travis Head have a reasonably easy innings? Like, it wasn't nothing's easy, but a reasonably easy innings because Marnus Labuschagne and McSweeney got him to the point where by the time Head came out, Bumrah was done. The ball was getting soft and old. The lights weren't on. Like, there were just all these different things that had happened and gone in his favor. I don't think that means it wasn't a great innings, but I think the backbone of this win is really the fact that McSweeney and Marnus didn't fail on that first night and that Mitchell Starc, completely cut the heart out of the Indian batting lineup. But this is where it doesn't really matter either way, because I think at a certain point, I'm not sure Australia has any answers for Bumrah, and I'm not sure India has many answers for Head either. Those two can kind of cancel each other out. It's the other players finding form at the right time. There were two players who passed 50 in this test match, right? I think I'm right in saying that. Marnus was one and Head was the other. So I don't want to take anything away from Head's innings because I thought it was fantastic, and what he does is what he does in the same way that what Bumrah does is what Bumrah does. But neither of these players can win a test on their own. And in the same way that Bumrah needed backup last test, Head needed, I wouldn't even say backup, he needed people to set the table for him in this one. And so you're seeing the best player, maybe perhaps from each side, dominating. And then you're seeing form fluctuations everywhere from everyone else, right?
Interesting. Now, talking about the fluctuations and how the two teams use the pink ball, Australia clearly come in it with a lot of experience, while India don't play as much pink ball tests, certainly not in Australia. They played one, but that was years back. Now, when they were
played
bowling,
one, but they weren't in that game particularly long, if you remember.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding. But when they were bowling, they did get a lot of movement. But was it too much for their own good? When it came to Australia, they looked controlled. They knew what to do with it. While in India's case, it was moving, but moving wildly. And then talking about how India used the length ball, because anyway, the key, as was mentioned by the pacers ahead of the test, was to bowl on length because it wouldn't always work bowling fuller.
So it's interesting that they've talked about that, because when we looked at the first innings, I'm pretty sure Australia bowled about a meter fuller than India. And that's a long distance as well. Well, it's only about that far, but you know what I mean. I think you should be looking at specifically what happened in the first test compared to the second test. So in that first test, they come along and Australia bowl a little bit shorter, and Bumrah comes out, licks his finger and goes, no, we need to be fuller. And everyone bowls fuller from India. In the next test, what probably would have made sense is for them to follow what Australia had done, especially because Australia is so good with the pink ball. They pulled it back, but I think specifically they're also a bit wide. That's a plan to Marnus. I'm not sure if they have a plan to McSweeney yet because they don't know a lot about McSweeney. But the plan to Marnus is very specifically to bowl wider. Unfortunately, though, what happens in that situation is that they bowl wider and Marnus is in a situation where he leaves them. They don't get McSweeney out because they drop the catch. And that allows it. So I think they were a little bit too wide, but I think it was a plan. And they were a little bit too short. Eventually, they started bowling fuller and at the stumps. But by that stage, Marnus was batting beautifully. Then Head comes in, and all these things start to happen. So, India probably slipped up a little bit. But when it comes down to it, if they'd caught Travis Head, they might not have been out of the game, right? They let Travis Head off twice. Both of those chances should be taken at international level. They had the wrong person. I thought he was going to get caught at mid off or mid on, or long off or long on. One of those positions, whether the fielder was in or the fielder was out. Why the hell would you have Mohammad Siraj in that position, right? Like there are plenty of other places on the field to hide the guy who's not very good when the ball goes up in the air. And then you had Rishabh Pant, who probably, by his body language, thought there was a first slip was closer to him. So whether Rohit had moved across or he'd just forgotten that Rohit had moved across, all these things are absolutely fine. And there you go. And that puts them in that situation. So it's all well and good to say they didn't quite bowl the right length, which is probably, it should be accurate that Australia should be better with the pink ball. They should know the exact length that they want to bowl because they're experts with it and they dominate with it. Whereas India should be, I know India have bowled with it in Adelaide, a few years back, and also have bowled with other pink balls before. But the Kookaburra, you do need to be very full. And one team got it right and one team didn't quite get it right. And when they had a chance to pull the game back towards them, two things happened. Three things happened. Two drop catches and then Travis Head. And once he gets going, you're in all sorts of trouble.
Archer Select is making a point about India not playing enough day-night tests. He says, can't remember when India did play the pink ball test last time. Do you think India should play pink ball test every series to get used to that ball? That might be overdoing it, but India potentially can because the number of tests involved in series involving India are higher because they play England and Australia pretty frequently. Other test playing nations don't get to play as many tests. And then Australia too has shown seriousness because this year in Shield cricket, they are going to be multiple day-night tests. India, on the other hand, we've not seen that for a considerable while.
I think it's probably true to say that Australia are specialists in day-night cricket in a way that no one else in the world is. I think there's also probably an element of Travis Head, Marnus Labuschagne, Mitchell Starc, Josh Hazlewood all really liking those conditions. Like, do you know what I mean? It's not just that there is a technical reason why Mitchell Starc is so good under lights. I'm not sure if there is with the batters or with Hazlewood, but there's certainly a technical reason why Mitchell Starc goes from a very average red ball bowler to a brilliant pink ball bowler. It's not an accident. But if India is going to play all these pink ball games, Megha, they're going to play with a SG ball, right?
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. So is that going to react the same way? Like, I'm not sure. This is the interesting thing. This is why I think Australia has such an advantage in doing this. Playing one or even 2 day-night games for every series. It's such a huge advantage for me because I'm like, no one else in the world plays anywhere near as much as they do. So you turn up, right? Like England, were there 2 day-night games against England, I think, in the last Ashes? Maybe 3? There was pink balls everywhere in that series, right? And England were like, what the hell? Like, we use a Duke's pink ball, which reacts differently again. We don't use it very often. And we're going up against a team who is used to playing with it. So I think it's really hard to beat Australia. They have lost one game. They lost that Gabba game. That was, I don't want to say a fluke, but it was, an anomaly, I think, rather than any kind of trend. They're even better, I think, in Adelaide than anywhere else because that's where they're most used to. So India can prepare for that sort of stuff. And they were practicing. Remember, I think people think that you need to play games. Remember, India were practicing with a pink ball even in Perth, right? They knew this was an important test. Even before they had won the Perth test, they were already thinking ahead. And you get that a lot. Do you remember when RCB were playing before the World Test Championship a few years ago, Kyle Jamieson was bowling in the nets with a juke ball when he wasn't playing for RCB.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Virat was facing a Duke's ball with throwdowns, like players and that sort of stuff a long way in advance. But preparing like that and being Mitchell Starc, who's like the world's leading pink ball bowler in Adelaide, you can't really compare to that, to having a couple of sessions. So you might get a situation sometimes where you're slightly behind the Australians, but I just think that they're used to it as players.
A lot of Indian fans are recalling when India last played the pink ball test, or rather day-night test, and it was in 2021 against England in Ahmedabad, and again the conditions were very different, and how the game shaped up was very different. So Krishna recalling that. Do you recall that, Jarrod? Krishna also mentions how Akshar Patel ran through England with the sliders. That was the series in which he made his test debut and was phenomenal.
That pitch, or the ball and the pitch, were really weird because so many wickets went to the straight ball rather than spin. And I felt at the time that there was something to do with the extra lacquer on the pink ball was under lights was just skidding on a little bit more. So again, that's absolutely nothing like Adelaide, right? Like Ashwin bowled a little bit when the ball was soft. Did Lyon bowl an over? Was it 1 over? I'm trying to even remember now. Lyon basically didn't play in this game, right? And so you have a situation where that isn't preparation. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's a different ball on a different ground in a different part of the world. It's like that isn't going to prepare India. And that there really isn't. It's hard enough to prepare for Australia in general, right? It's not normal conditions for anywhere else in the world. Then you add this other variable where you have Australian players who are experts on this thing and the rest of the world who are not. It's a tough situation for anyone to come into. And if you would have told me that India won 4-1 in this series and you said pick the test they lost, I would have picked this over Perth. This would have been the test I would have picked. And it's just because of how many of Australian bowlers get better, and a couple of the Australian batters like it as well. You know, it's not easy to bat in these conditions, right? It's not a normal thing. It's also, I know this will sound weird, but it's about body clock, right? It's a weird time for a professional cricketer to be playing. Like if you even ODI, it's like that's one off. So you change your body clock for one day. 2, 3, 4, 5 days. Not that this one was that big of a deal, but all of those things play a part, right? And you know, if you're someone who likes to go to sleep earlier, right? If you're someone who's used to your normal test match, timings and everything else, this throws you. The Australians are very used to this. They've done it a lot.
India probably in 2016 season had pink ball Duleep Trophy. They used Kookaburra balls for it, as I'm cross-checking they did. Do you see India doing more of it now? Because whenever they've toured, at least the 2 Australian tours, they didn't fare too well in these tests. So do you see that changing? And there's a comment around how Australia does a lot of these pink ball tests, but other test playing nations are not seen doing it, whether that's England at their home soil, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, or West Indies. So are the other teams as interested about pink ball tests? India did have one against Bangladesh, but as hosts, how many countries are actually interested?
Yeah, so England have had one because I've covered it. I can't remember how many they've had in England, but I think Edgbaston certainly had one from my. I know I've been to a day-night test in England. I'm trying to think of how many other games.
How did your body clock respond to it as a spectator?
It's really weird.
Or broadcaster?
It's actually very weird. Yeah, it's really really weird because you can't really think about it. You've been a cricket journalist as well. You finish late at night, right? And as a journalist, you finish even later than the players, like depending on who you're writing for and all these sorts of things. You might finish 2 or 3 hours after the play. So if the game is scheduled to finish at 9:30, there's an extra half an hour. You might still be working at 12:31, right? You can't do anything that night. That's it. And it's very hard. Anyone will know who's ever been a shift worker. It's a very hard thing to go straight to bed after that kind of a situation, right? It's not a particularly easy thing. So I know how hard it is and how different straight away. So just to get to Arko's full question. So I'll just bring this up here. So Dubai's had a couple. Let's take them away. Obviously, Brisbane's had the second most. They've had 3. Edgbaston has had 1. They've had 1 in Caboca, one in New Zealand, one in Eden Park, one in Barbados. Obviously, Eden Gardens has had one, so there's been two. There's been three in India. There's Chinnaswami's had one as well. Another one in Mount Maunganui, right? So essentially, Australia has had, and I'm just going to do this off the top of my head. I thought there was one in Perth as well. Maybe I'm misremembering the one in Perth. Australia. Oh no, there's the one in Perth. Found it. So Australia's had about about 13 or so.
13, yeah,
And
yeah.
the rest
yeah.
and the rest of cricket combined has had less
What
than
is
that,
it?
right?
Oh.
I don't know. I'd have to count it up, but it's less than that. I give 1, 2. Now you're gonna make me do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's 13 in Australia and 8 everywhere else. There's a few reasons for this, Arco, and let me just go through it. One is in England, because of the daylight savings and the Northern Hemisphere lights and everything, it means that you would have to play quite late. If you have a look, England play a lot of day games in ODI cricket compared to a lot of other countries around the world. Oh, Shera is all over it, right? Also, it's quite often it's cold in England late at night. Do you know what I mean? It is a Northern Hemisphere country. It's not a particularly warm country. You can get some great summer nights, but you don't always. And so, you know, if the funniest thing ever is to watch like a Blast game or something and have like the poor Sky commentators out on the field late at night, shaking, trying to interview a player who's also shaking. Like, it gets cold. Night cricket in England is not always particularly fun. Even early evening cricket can be, but if it goes too late, that causes an issue. So England is a tricky one, right? Also, I think if cricket was on free-to-air TV, that would change things in England a little bit. The West Indies, if they're already in a tricky time zone, they're already struggling a little bit, and it depends on who they play. If there aren't that many countries they can play in day-night games and actually make it work, right? So they played that game at Barbados. I've heard that they don't think it necessarily works over there. They would go for it because they think it would get more crowds in, but they're worried about sometimes upsetting time zones and everything else in certain places. New Zealand, my guess is, might be a little bit similar to England. Late at night when it gets a little bit dark, right? It might get a little bit colder. Not all the time, of course. They still have a decent summer, but there are certain parts of New Zealand you probably don't want to play a day-night game in, would be my thought again. So I've heard that they're interested in playing more, and they're a little bit disappointed that they haven't played as many at the moment. So I would assume they're going to follow Australia. South Africa should follow Australia. There's no reason for South Africa not to play more day-night games, right? Then you get to Asia. Asia should definitely have more day-night games. Can you think of a reason why they haven't?
Because the administrators haven't been as interested, or is it down to the conditions?
A little bit. Conditions.
You
What's
could
a specific condition that happens a lot in Asia at night in
dew
games? Dew.
and how it can impact. Yeah.
If you have dew in a day-night test, it's really, really an issue. And, you know, dew affects ODI games, but no one cares about ODI games. And dew affects T20 games, but no one really cares that much, right? If you get to the point later on where there's any kind of dew, and we've had dew in other day-night tests as well, not massive amounts. But if you do get that, there's a lot of grounds around the world that have dew issues as well. But a lot of it just comes down to the fact that the pink ball isn't perfect. These are low scoring games. They're all sort of all over the shop. And I don't think the administrators have really cottoned on to the simple fact that if you play games at night, you're playing them in prime time and you can double your advertising rates.
Exactly.
Which is what they should be doing. But we have to look at dew. We have to look at, will the crowds turn up? Because I think if you have them in England, at least to start with, depending on where you have it, you might not get as good crowds. But the other way of doing it in England might be that it's, and I think they did this in the Edgbaston one, is they play them a little bit earlier. So instead of starting at 11, maybe you start at, 1 o'clock, right? Or 1:30, or 12 o'clock, or whatever that may be, to go through into prime time a little bit more. So there are ways of doing that. And that won't, I'm talking about England. You might be able to do that in somewhere like New Zealand as well. And in other countries, there are places like Perth's had one. It was absolutely pointless, Perth having a day-night test, Megha, because that game is already on during prime time on the whole East Coast. They literally lost some of their hours because people were just turning off for the last session because they were going to bed. So you that's what I mean. It's not an automatic thing. I had friends of mine who were in Tasmania who were like, they don't really like day-night games in Tasmania because, again, it's more New Zealand or English type conditions down there. If you get a really hot summer's day, it's great. But if you get a blustery day, it's not that enjoyable to be out. And it's not like a football game or a T20 game. You're not there for 3 hours, right? You're there all day. So
Yeah.
it's also about viewing habits, right? Like, it hasn't really been encouraged. Where's the place that it's been most encouraged? Adelaide. Adelaide fans now know exactly what this test match is and how to handle it, right? If you're Eden Park and you have it once in 2018, it's like, it's only ever a novelty. So there's a big issue. I think the 3 major Southern Hemisphere teams should definitely be looking at more of it. I think in Asia, you have to look at grounds where you're just pretty positive you're not going to get dew, and then look at playing more of them there. In England, you're probably looking at twilight games. And with the West Indies, I think they should actually play games at certain times that allow them to sometimes actually move time zones a little bit and allow perhaps for more of a party atmosphere than you get during the day games. But it's not a straightforward thing, day-night test matches. And as you said before, there's a lot of administrators who don't consider it real test cricket.
Yeah.
There is a hangover from that as well.
There's another interesting point to consider here. New Zealand, probably when hosting a subcontinent team, might be more interested in it being a day-night test because the broadcast, again, would be catering to the prime, not really the prime time, but still a more such a time zone where people would be already awake. They'd be interested in watching instead of setting their alarm specifically for that test and not waking up.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean. I think there is what's the best way of putting it? I think there is a missed opportunity by some cricket boards to actually understand what they could use it for. It'd be really interesting to see in India what the ratings are for the Perth game and the
Yeah.
Adelaide game compared to the Eastern State games, which are going to be played very early in the morning, right? I know most people in India will wake up while those games are on, but they will start earlier in the morning. There must be a difference, right? There has to be. We notice when we cover cricket that we get from India, when we get India playing in Australia, that the day games do much better for us because the fans don't see as much cricket. So they have to come to places like Cricket8 and good areas and wherever else I'm working on that particular day, right? Like TalkSport, I don't know. I have no idea where I am at any time. So there is an element of like, we already know that is true, but we don't know what the overall ratings are. So is it worth in the future Australia doing something a little bit different? And I wondered if that was also an element of the Ashes, of playing more day-night games because of the hours in the UK. A normal Ashes test starts at about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night English time and finishes at 7 a.m. in the morning. You've missed half your audience, right? If you start it at 3 or 4 a.m., English people, as they wake up, can start to watch it, and then they can follow it throughout the morning. This is what I'm talking about. World Cups are pretty good at this sort of stuff. They still get some things wrong, but World Cups are pretty good at this. The rest of cricket is still sitting there, like, not understanding it. Look at the CPL. Look at some of the weird times they play CPL games. They're like, we just need 12 people in India to turn their TVs on here. Like, we need to be able to do that. That is a big part of what you're trying to do.
Rakshit needs a break, a dinner break, a snack break, whatever you term it. But Jarrod, if an administrator was to ask you what approach should they adopt, I think we know what you'd suggest them because we know how we get more views on Cricket8. In the meanwhile, we'd take a short break.
Remember to support us by subscribing and sharing, but also signing up at cricket8.com, where live scorecards cover 8,000 matches a year with advanced visual details that tell you who is actually in front in the game.
Well, who's actually in front at the moment? Obviously, it's all square as far as India and Australia are concerned, but England have taken an unassailable 2-0 lead against New Zealand. Would you want us to shift our attention to that, or would you still want to discuss about India-Australia test? Should we conclude the discussion on India-Australia?
Have you got anything more in India-Australia? I'll answer anything you want. What have you got, Megha?
If Josh Hazelwood is fit and ready to go for the next test, what happens to Boland?
I suppose we can't make that assumption until we've got to Brisbane and we've seen what kind of wicket they're going for. So there is a possibility that they drop Lyon, not because he's not bowled or bowled poorly in the first game, but more that if they look and it's grassy, I think they'll just be like, we've got 4 informed seamers. Let's not stuff around here. Let's just go with that. And then if that means they might have to lean on Mitchell Marsh a little bit more than they want, they might risk it. Remember though, India was a team who was more, what's the best way of putting it, was who could improve between the 2 test matches, right? So India brought Rohit Sharma in. I'm missing someone else. Who else did they bring in? Well, they brought in Ashwin, Rohit Sharma.
Yeah.
Am I missing someone
Washington missed out, and that's the 2 changes
Were
that
they
India
the only
made.
2 changes? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, because Dhruva went out. Shubman Gill. So there's 3 players that they picked that were better than the players that were in the side to upgrade the team, and they lost. So it's not as if like you're always guaranteed that will work. And Boland and Hazelwood can sometimes they're slightly different bowlers. Hazelwood bowls a bit more for caught behinds, and Boland bowls a little bit more for LBWs. But they're very similar in that they are metronomic. They do overlap a little bit, right? Now, if you think the wicket's going to help, then the overlapping doesn't matter, and you just go with it. But if you're not sure if the wicket's going to be that helpful, having Lyon and Lyon especially in current Australian conditions, you're not picking Lyon for a best case scenario. You're picking Lyon for worst case scenario, right? You're picking Lyon in case the pitch is flatter than you think, or the ball goes soft one day, or you need a holding bowler because Mitch Marsh can't bowl, or whatever it may be. All of these things. So yeah, I think Australia can obviously get a little bit better, but I don't think it's an automatic thing if you bring Hazelwood and play them all together. That's better. They might just take Boland back out. Boland's coming back from an injury as well. It's very possible they say, you got through that one. Let's have the next one off because we don't know if Cummins or Stark or Hazelwood may not get injured again. Like, all those things are on the table, I think.
And strangely enough, in the build-up to the test, Boland didn't look too effective. But when the stage was set and the platform was offered to him, he thrived on it. And also the fact that the changes that India made didn't really contribute a whole lot. Ravichandran Ashwin, a lot was obviously expected of him considering his experience and the angle that he provides as an off-spinner. But it didn't really work out. Obviously, he was replacing Washington, so it wasn't really about replacing him. Okay, you've already taken a question about Lyon. They will probably drop Lyon after seeing Perth. Would that happen?
They didn't.
Can Lyon be dropped?
Yeah, I think he could be dropped. I mean, I don't think they've got any issue. They'll just say to him, look, right at the moment, the way these wickets are playing, we don't need you at the moment. But they're not going to drop Lyon for a test at the Gabba based on what happened at Perth Stadium, right? That isn't how they're going to go about it. Because if they were going to drop him, they would have dropped him for Adelaide anyway. So they've got backup seam bowlers. They had backup options that they could have also brought in. That wasn't a problem at all. No, when it comes down to it, I think it will be more. Lyon won't be dropped because they're worried about his form. Lyon will be dropped more because they'll be looking at it as, is this exactly the setup that we now want going ahead? It won't be a form thing at all with Lyon.
And coming back to the point that I was making about the amount of experience that India were bringing back into this test, Rohit Sharma at number 6, blessing in disguise probably for him. Would you look at it like that? A question at the same time. And it's just not working for him. It's been multiple innings now since the home summer started. How do you see Rohit Sharma coming out of this sort of rut in form that he's stuck in?
It tells you a lot about Indian cricket, I think, that a year and a half ago, the 2 best opening batters in cricket were probably Rohit Sharma and Usman Khawaja. They've both lost form this year, and I'm the only person talking about Usman Khawaja's bad form. Whereas everyone is talking about Rohit Sharma's. Now, I know Rohit Sharma's is a bit more dramatic. I think was it averaging 12 in his last 6 tests. Usman Khawaja hasn't looked particularly good in this series either, right? And I do think that it does tell you that like there is an unreasonable expectation at all times when it comes to these players and how they're looked at and everything else. The other side, of course, is also that if you're not making runs, you're not making runs, right? And I thought he did a really good thing from a captaincy point of view. He tried to maximize the batting lineup by coming in at number 6. I don't think there's any issues with him batting at number 6 or anywhere else. I think I think that works quite well for him. But the way that but the issue then has become he's now failed. And so the pressure is back on him again. That's more than fair. I think that no one should have any issue with that. He's just got to make runs. That's what it comes down to. I've heard a lot of conversations about Rohit Sharma's captaincy not being very good. Do you know what would make Rohit Sharma's captaincy a lot better? If he suddenly started making runs. Yeah. And it would have nothing to do with his captaincy. It's just that his team would make more runs, and so he'd look like a better captain, which kind of tells you why, the conversations about those things are quite often so skewed. Wrong. They're wrong.
Neither of those. So, but yeah, also probably because one, he's the captain. Second, he was not featuring in the first test that India won comprehensively. So the one change, rather 3 changes, but that one change in particular, with it being the captain, probably makes more noises. And then also, there are a lot of people, there are a few that are alluding to the previous 2 Border Gavaskar trophies, where India did make a match out of almost every game. So that fight was missing in this clash, and hence all the more noise. My ear didn't fall off. Were you laughing at that?
No, because what were we saying in Perth? We've never seen Australia this soft before. We've never seen Australia look so weak before. Blah, blah, blah. Who gives a shit? The next test they win, right? And now we're hearing the same thing. Oh, last time they fought and they fought and they fought. This time they're not fighting. They lost, right? Like, they lost. Your team sometimes is going to lose. And we've seen 2 massive swings. We've seen a huge win for India, a massive win for India, and a pretty big win for Australia in the space of these 2. Does that mean that in the first test, Australia could never win again? Well, clearly not. So why would we think the same with India, right? In that other series, they were much more arm wrestling. This one hasn't been arm wrestling. One team's been on top and they have just capitalized. Or the other team's been on top and they've just capitalized. Those are the things that we have seen so far. It's like, I know this has been a crazy test year. I know if I'm an Indian fan, I must be looking at the scorecards in England, in New Zealand, England at the moment, just being like, what the hell happened to us at home, right? And I could go on and on about all the weird test matches, but we are seeing wild swings. So why would you think, because you've lost this test, that suddenly you're in a situation where you can't win the next one when you won the previous one by 7,000 runs? I don't have the exact number to hand, Megha, but I believe it was 7,000.
So it's not all doom and gloom, but probably you'd be looking at England-New Zealand test and also feeling good, because New Zealand at least are out of contention. England have always been out of contention, also because of the overrate penalties, on which Ben Stokes has a lot of opinion. He doesn't understand first World Test Championship, and he's not too convinced about how these overrate penalties work. Jarrod, you know a thing or two about it, and also the number of warnings that England have been given before that penalty was imposed on them. Would you like to explain it to Ben Stokes through this platform, or to anybody wanting to know?
I want to say 2 different things. Giving penalties to bowling teams when the entire game has changed is a bit silly, right? When are we going to start giving penalties to batters who ask for a drink or a change of gloves all the time, right? Like, there are plenty of things now that delay the game that is not the bowling team anymore. It's not like the old days where it was just the bowling team. So I want to say that very clearly at the start, Megha. Before I say this, if you don't want an overrate penalty, bowl your overs on time. It is really easy to bowl your overs on time. Do you know how I know this, Megha? I watch first-class cricket. I watch women's cricket. They don't seem to have the same issues as the top-level men do. Associate cricket don't seem to have the same issues, right? This is only
that sense
a problem.
Of entitlement?
I think it's a sense of entitlement, but I think they've gotten away with it for so long, right? And there are so many caveats to make sure that Australia, England, and India never get penalties as well. Like, I don't know, there was one, I think it was England and Australia, fought really hard within the ICC. I don't know if India was involved with this, but I know Australia was, but I thought it was Australia and England. Fought really hard, so it didn't matter how slow your overs were if you bowled a team out within 80 overs. And it's like, oh, come on. It's still, people are still paying their tickets, everyone. Like, I just bowl your overs in time. And I remember, and this is a while back now, because it was Daniel Vettori, but I remember Daniel Vettori saying, it's really hard for us because we can bowl through our overs really easily. So we have to slow down towards the end of the day. So we only bowl 90. And I remember thinking, oh, wait a minute. New Zealand are a pretty tactically astute team. They've always got things going on and everything else. They don't bowl a lot of spin either, Megha. How is it that they are possible to be able to do this and other teams aren't? And when it comes down to it, you watch first-class cricket, teams are quicker around the field. They don't spend 10 minutes discussing things between balls, right? It is not that hard for us to be able to do something as simple as that. So I wouldn't worry about that. I find it really weird. A lot of things that Ben Stokes says just don't make any sense. Like, we don't understand the World Test Championship. Really? There's a dude, I can't remember what his name is, but he's got like an index online. You can go on there, Ben. You can go through and put all your games in to work out how many points you need and at what percentage you need. It's a free software online, right? Oh, I don't know why we're getting slow overrate penalties. I'm going to just put my hand up here and say it's probably because you've got slow overrates, right? Sick and tired of the nonsense, right, that comes out of some players' mouths when it's like, just do the job, right? The job is to bowl this many overs a day. If we want to change it, like the reason we are so strict, and I say strict, we're not that strict, but the reason we got strict in the first place is because the West Indies was slowing it down so they could bowl 4 fast bowls a day by bowling about 65 overs. It was terrible cricket to watch. And there are so many people, especially, our cricket fans now who are growing up and just being like, as long as the day's entertaining, that's fine. What? So if we have 12 overs bowled, so you can have your Shoaib Akhtar bowler bowl at 180 kilometers, you'll be happy? No, you won't. Right? Won't matter that those 12 overs, there was 100 runs scored for 6 wickets. You'd still be sitting there going, I had to wait 5 minutes between each delivery. There is a natural, understanding of what players can do, and they've gone out of their way. So, very annoyed. I'm just annoyed at it because we can fix this, and we don't want to fix it, really.
Well, so important that we got you to rant on something because up until this point you were all amicable and it wasn't just happening for us. But yeah, also the point that then there is 160 over cushion as well. If you manage to get them bundled out across the 2 innings within 160 overs,
Yep.
you get that leeway. And beyond that, there's this discourse around how it is tougher in countries which favor pace, where you have more pacers as compared to the subcontinent where spinners are used, so they go quicker through their
Okay.
overs.
So
India
make your
has.
pitches. So make your pitches spin more.
I am not advocating what Ben Stokes is saying. I'm just trying to present a
No,
point.
you're
of
right.
view.
What you're saying is right. I mean, I think that's fair. But who was the team that I used as an example? It was New Zealand,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
In the old days, England used to have 2 spinners sometimes at home. Their pitches have changed. They want seam bowling at home. Okay, bowl your 90 overs or shut up. Do you run up?
And
Make your run up shorter. I mean, who would you say is the slowest bowler in modern cricket? Can you think of anyone?
slowest in terms of their run up,
They're over. How long it takes them to bowl their over?
I could say the quickest. Who's the slowest? That's a
So the
tricky
slowest
question.
is Shannon Gabriel,
Okay.
right? Big dude, big run up, not particularly fast walker, right? His overs, it is almost impossible for the West Indies to not be behind on the over rate when he is playing. I was talking to the West Indies and they were aware of this. And so they were like, we have to hurry through overs from spinners. So there'll be
Others, yeah.
times when you'll be watching us and you'll be watching us bowl spinners to go through. It's part of the game. It has always been part of the game to actually get your overs in. Modern teams don't want it to be part of the game, right? There has to be a minimum at a certain point, right? And these teams are flaunting it. And as I said at the start, it is not just the bowling teams. DRSs, batters asking for their bananas to come out to them and all this sort of nonsense, right? Things do take a lot longer now. But when it comes down to it, you know that you can move quicker. You are choosing not to because you want to be tactical. Fine. In T20 cricket, what happens? Fielder goes out, comes into the ring. Maybe that's what we have to start doing, is actually finding players on the ground rather than with suspensions and saying, okay, now you lose a wicket. You were too slow, so you start the next game 1 wicket down. Right? Like, I don't know. Is it a 20-run
That'd be
penalty?
very enterprising. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. What I do know is that pretending that you can't bowl 90 overs in 6 hours is bullshit, because people did it for generations, right? And so it is absolute nonsense to say it is not possible. It has always been possible. We are playing the game in a way that makes it harder.
And it is relevant in Test cricket because you have a certain allotted time beyond which conditions do not allow you to play. While in T20Is and ODIs, of course, you have to bowl those overs. It's not that it gets carried over to the next day. And also, with it being World Test Championships, you can inflict this penalty. Otherwise, earlier in Test,
doesn't-
15% match fee deducted didn't matter.
Didn't. Also, to be fair, like England don't care about the World Test Championship, so deducting their points of a thing they've already decided they're not going to play in, which is we mentioned before. Anyway, look, so England beat New Zealand in a Test match. I think the big one for me is the amount of times in this series that New Zealand have got themselves into a position to win, because that's kind of what happened against Sri Lanka as well. It's kind of what happened against Australia at times, and they keep getting themselves into position to win these games. So what were England in the first? I'm just looking at the scorecard. Yeah, 43 for 3. Like,
Yeah.
you're in a huge chance of winning that game, and then it's not like England made 1,000 runs. They made 280 runs, and what was the score? They were 53 for 1. New Zealand in response
New Zealand,
before
yeah.
the
And then
before the huge collapse happened. That's 2 positions in that game that New Zealand had themselves close to the chance of victory and absolutely stuffed up. And you go back to the previous game, there were opportunities there as well. They're really being disappointing at the moment, New Zealand, and I'm not sure exactly what the issue is. The England side is fine, right? But it's Wokes, Atkinson, Cass, right? It's not the best attack that England have ever had. They seem to be dominating New Zealand's batters quite regularly. And then obviously there's a Harry Brook issue, I think, that we're all pretty aware of at this point. But realistically, you can't just say that one player is beating you, because they're putting so much pressure on England and then completely allowing it to come back. And Pope has played a part in that. Stokes has played a part in that. It's not Brook on his own. There's usually someone at the other end also helping out. And I think if I'm New Zealand, I would just be scratching my head. Their test year is one of the weirdest I've ever seen. They almost lost a test to South Africa's D team, right? Everyone's forgotten that. They lost to Sri Lanka, right? A punchy Sri Lankan team.
before that, Australia, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, they had chances against Australia. They lost against Australia. They lost against Sri Lanka. They beat India, and now they're getting pulverized by England. How do you beat the best home team in the last 20 years, right? And not just beat them, whitewash them. You've never done that before. You've never won a Test series 3-0 before. How do you do that and then go to this? Like, if I'm a New Zealand fan, I'm just like, sorry, I'm out. We won the World Test Championship. The women won the World Cup. We beat India. I think we're good now. Maybe we'll see you in 18 months' time, and let's see what's happening. Yeah.
2007-8 was the last time when England defeated New Zealand at home. So New Zealand are intent on doing things that have not happened before, be it beating India, being the first team in 12 years to beat India at home. But Harry Brook, let's talk a bit in detail about him. In the first test as well, 171 was what he scored, 5 dropped catches. New Zealand would be thinking about that as well, and 8 or 11 dropped catches in total. Catches were being dropped left, right and centre. And then in this test as well, his average against New Zealand is above 100. 10 tests, overseas tests, and he's been phenomenal thus far. And Cass's story is interesting as well. He's grown from strength to strength. Atkinson has a number of records to his name and very diverse records. A hat-trick now alongside 10 wickets in a game, and then a century and a fifer. So all these interesting collection of records to his name. So all of these players and the young talent that England is backing, regardless of what they've done in the past, not in Harry Brook's case, but at least in others' case, and it's all working. And Bethel and his affinity to second innings, just stepping up regardless of situation in the second innings.
No, I think you're right. Look, it's interesting. Brook is clearly an issue for New Zealand. I think he made a big 100 in the previous series against them, if I remember correctly, when I was covering that one. So, like, he now has 8 Test hundreds, and It feels like a decent collection of those. I'm just having a look. What's his numbers? He's played 4 tests against New Zealand for 300s at an average of almost 100 and a
Over
strike
100.
rate of run a ball,
Yeah.
right? So it's ridiculous what he's doing against them. And it's not like he's been terrible against everyone else. But so that is absolutely wild. Look, Cass is a very good player. I don't think Cass is so good that he should be dominating New Zealand at home, though. Like, Cass is a better bowler than Matt Henry, right? So the other team have a better bowler than Cass, and yet Cass has been magnificent. And Atkinson, I mean, he's playing Test cricket bingo, right? So what is he? He needs a pair, right? I think everyone needs a pair. He needs 6 sixes in an over. That would be nice, right? He needs to run out a captain. I think that's always a good one. He's almost collected a full lifetime of like
Random records, yeah.
Yeah, already. It's ridiculous. But you look at this England side, it's good. Is it smashing New Zealand 2-0 at home good? No. New Zealand have played a big part in that.
All right, Jarrod, before we conclude, you started the series with a 4-1 prediction. Are you still backing it? And has your opinion changed? Did you back then mention who would be winning those 4 tests?
I wouldn't have picked India to win the first one. I would have picked Australia to win the Adelaide one. Okay. I only want to change it to 3-2 Australia if Shami plays. It now looks like if he plays, it's going to be 1 test. So I'm not even sure that I would change anything for him coming at the moment. It's, I was for about a year, I thought it would be 3-2. And then when Shami got injured, I thought 4-1. I'm probably halfway between those 2 positions because I think Siraj has bowled quite well, but I'm a little bit more worried about India's batting now than I was beforehand. I thought when Kohli made runs and Jaiswal made runs, that was a really good sign. And we've now seen India only make runs in 1 innings. Australia's only made runs in 1 innings as well, but Australia's bowling is deeper right at the moment.
Yeah.
Like, you can trust Australia's 3rd seamer or 4th seamer, and you can't do that with India. So, there is a bit of a balance there. I could easily see how India win another test out of the last 3. And it's not beyond them to win 2 of them. Right? I don't think this is not a perfect Australian side. Outside of Head at the moment, who's the batter that you really trust? Carey and Marsh haven't quite looked at their best. They haven't looked terrible, but they haven't quite looked at their best. McSweeney still
Smith
shouldn't
has
be opening.
struggled.
Yeah. Smith isn't making any runs. Usman looks like he's struggling a little bit. Marnus looked really good in this last innings, and so you wonder if that is him returning to form. But we're going to have to see more than 1 innings. They've still got an older bowling lineup that is, 2 abdominal strains away from causing some problems. And India have plenty of weapons and plenty of different lineups to go with, and a much stronger, at least on paper. Still say that a 4-1 victory for Australia would not massively shock me, but a 3-2 victory to India wouldn't either. I'm not going to predicting Test cricket this year doesn't make any sense because, if you'd have asked me at the start of the chase today when Sri Lanka were chasing 300 against South Africa, I would have been like, they'll be 16 for 4. I watched them face the new ball. Was it the second new ball? Yeah, I watched them face. No, it was the new ball. I think in the first innings. I think I'm remembering back to that Test match correctly, and I was like, I don't know how they haven't lost about another 100 wickets here. Like, they should be losing a wicket like all the time in that chase, and they got away with it somehow, and they ended up making a decent score and getting themselves into a good position in that game. I don't know how they did it, and now they're what? They need 143 runs with 5 wickets
43.
in hand, right? What are we talking about, Megha? This year's nuts. They're going to have
But
another...
in the first innings as well, they looked in a solid position and then they lost wickets in heaps.
That was the second new ball when it came. So I would have... That's what I mean. This is a new ball wicket, and yet you look at the way that Sri Lanka have been incredibly lucky against the new ball twice, in this. Like, that could have been slaughtered. And yet the previous game... When the new ball was also doing a lot, they couldn't bat at all. I don't understand Test cricket as it's being played at the moment. It's so wild and variable. If you told me India won 4-1, I'd be like, that's very unlikely. But I don't think I'd be sitting there. I don't know if I'll ever feel the same as I did when New Zealand won 3-0 again, right? Like if Australia win this series 4-1, rock up to Sri Lanka and lose 2-0, I'll be like, yeah, that's fair.
That's fine.
Fair. Yeah, that's completely
That's actually the new norm. Yeah.
Exactly. The new normal is madness. So, my predictions were made on full strength teams coming in, everyone playing. There's a bit more chaos around the Australian and the Indian side than I had expected. Even if you thought this series was going to be 1-1, what are the chances that you thought one team would win by a billion runs and the other team would win by a billion wickets? Like, that's not a normal 1-1. That's insanity. So I can't help anyone if that's what you're looking for.
Interesting. Now, just to conclude, Sri Lanka are still to play 2 tests. If they win this one, they still are in with the chance, but the 2 tests are against Australia. Australia obviously has to tour Sri Lanka for those 2 tests after Border Gavaskar Trophy. New Zealand are finally out of it, having lost 2 tests against England. That defeat they inflicted against India did raise some hopes, but now it's all ended. For England, it ended long time back because they weren't just interested. South Africa are in with a strong chance if they win all 3 remaining, including this test. They needn't bother about anyone, but it gets slightly complicated if they lose. By the way, they also feature in 2 tests against Pakistan. So it's all very interestingly poised. And my bad, couldn't take a lot of questions. Jarrod would compensate for it. The comments that you leave in the comments section below, Jarrod would be personally answering from Cricket8 account for all of them. Would you be, Jarrod?
No, I'm going to go watch to see if Bangladesh can win this ODI.
All right. He's saying this at the moment. He will. Thank you so much for joining. Goodbye and take care. And there's another podcast due for the week. Stay tuned for all our updates. And we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Remember to support us by subscribing and sharing, but also signing up at cricket8.com, where live scorecards cover 8,000 matches a year with advanced visual details that tell you who is actually in front in the game.